Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilove, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. We have a fabulous guest today. His name is Erik DaRosa. He is a motivational speaker, mental health advocate, and co-host of the From Survivor to Thriver podcast. Erik is on a mission to shatter the stigma of mental health issues and have open and honest conversations regarding mental health. He is also a ski instructor at the Aspen Skiing Company and spends his summers as the lead mountain bike coach for Sacred Cycle, a Colorado based nonprofit whose mission is to empower survivors of sexual trauma through the intersection of mountain biking and community. Erik, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. It's such an honor to be on the show with you this morning. And when I know before we started to go live, we were talking a little bit about the weather and what's happening down in Denver and what I'm looking out the window to here in Snowmass. It's so great to be speaking to a fellow Coloradoan this morning. So thank you again.
Well, thank you for being here. And it is wonderful to talk to not only a fellow Coloradan, but a former you were East Coast and I was Western Pennsylvania, so I wasn't quite as far east as you, and little transplant into Colorado. And just tell us, before we get really into the nitty gritty of your story, is, why you moved to Colorado and how you love it.
Sure. So my wife and I moved to Snowmass, Colorado, which for those who aren't familiar with the geography of the state is about 200 miles southwest of Denver. We moved here in October of 2011. We had been coming here since the winter of 2005, skiing. My in-laws owned a house here. And so we would travel back and forth from New York City to come ski here. And as my mental health journey took many twists and turns, as we'll chat about as the podcast goes on, started to recognize that the one place that I found most at peace and I was able to really connect my mind and my body was when I was on the snow skiing. And so we made the decision in the spring of 2011 to leave our full-time jobs in New York and move here to Snowmass. And it's been just under 11 years since we've been here. And it's a wonderful, wonderful place.
Was it a hard decision to leave your full-time jobs? Because I'm guessing, I've been to New York City, but living there and going from that type of a lifestyle to Snowmass, it's quite the transition and quite the change.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And when, I grew up just south of Boston, about 45 minutes. So went to school outside of Boston and then lived in New York City for almost 2 decades. So for the first, let's call it almost 40 years of my life, I was living, working, going to school in what people consider to be two of the big East Coast cities. But I found when I was outside of the city, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, we would go up to Vermont on weekends to ski. We would come out here to Colorado, that there was just a sense of peace. And we'll talk a little bit about 9/11 as that's part of my story. But New York City and the city life started to change for us. It's one thing to work in the city and to live in the suburbs, but we actually lived in the city. We were both within walking distance from our apartment to our office. And so there was never really that escape from that fast-paced city life. It almost felt like it was a 24/7, always on the go. And so when we actually made the decision to move here, we had thought through it, and my wife continues her communications career here. And as you had mentioned, I teach skiing full time. And so I still get to be very connected to friends of mine from my New York days who come out and ski. But it was probably one of the best decisions that the two of us collectively have ever made.
I'm sure that you became very popular with your friends. All of a sudden, they were coming out of the woodwork saying, "Hey, do you remember me? Can we come and ski with you? We'll stay with you."
It's interesting that you say that. So my wife and I just celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary a couple of days ago, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And we were having dinner, and that very conversation came up about how we've lived here almost 11 years now. We have access to the mountains. We both teach skiing. My wife is a ski instructor in addition to her communications job. And we really thought once we moved out here that we would have a flood of people who would want to come out here and visit. Since we moved, I've had two high school friends come out. I've had two New York City friends come out. That's it. My wife has had one friend slash colleague from New York City come out, and that's it. So we were actually shocked. We thought people were gonna, be calling us all the time, and can we come out and stay? We want to come out and ski. And interestingly enough, as we were having that conversation the other night, we've had friends go to Vail, we've had friends go to Utah, other mountains, and not be here. So go figure.
Yeah, I can't figure that out. I mean, even though I never lived in the mountains, I moved to Denver from Pittsburgh, outside the Pittsburgh area. And it was probably the first 2 or 3 years. Boy, I had like swinging doors on my apartment. Everybody was coming to visit me, and I'd have to think, now, who are you and how do I know you? But yeah.
Yeah, no, we were really, really surprised, but I will say we've made an amazing community of friends. They talk about chosen family, and
Mm.
we have just an amazing chosen family here in Snowmass and other parts of Colorado.
Mhm. Now, were you a ski instructor when you were living back east and you would go up to Vermont, or was this something that just happened after you moved to Colorado?
So the whole ski story is a very interesting journey, and one which my friends and my clients find very interesting. So I came to skiing very late, even though I grew up in New England. My family didn't ski. When I met my wife in college, she started skiing around the age of 9.
Mhm.
So it was something that her family did all the time. And they spent time both skiing in Vermont, but also here in Colorado. It wasn't until I turned 33,
Mhm.
at the urging of my therapist in New York, to try skiing. And so for my wife's 33rd birthday, which was about 6 months after mine, I surprised her with a ski trip with her mom and stepdad to Vermont, and I said I'm going to learn how to ski. And the reaction on everybody's part was just pure and utter shock. And so fast forward from that was in March of 2005. In the winter of 2010, 2011, we had a house in southern Vermont near a mountain called Mount Snow. And we decided to become part-time ski instructors. It was part of us testing the water to see if
Mm.
that was a life that was going to work for us. And for
Mhm.
me, it combined the things that I loved the most, which was skiing. But when I looked at my job in New York, I wasn't so crazy about the actual nuts and bolts of the finance world, but I loved the mentoring and the coaching.
Mhm.
And that's when I realized, wow, I could probably put these two things together. And
Mhm.
so we taught part time in the 2010, 2011 winter in Vermont. And then when we decided we were going to make the move out here to Colorado, we were lucky enough to have a couple of really close friends here in Snowmass who were also ski instructors and involved with the ski company. And so we applied and they hired us. And when I tell you, when I look back now on my skiing ability and my understanding of the sport back then compared to where it is now, they certainly took a flyer on me. And I think it was based much more on my ability to connect with people rather
Mhm.
than my ability to tear it up on the snow.
Yeah, so it wasn't your technical skills that sold them on you.
It absolutely was not my technical skills. And throughout the last, 10 and a half, 11 seasons now, my technical skills have definitely changed dramatically. And my understanding of the sport has changed dramatically. And but yeah, it definitely wasn't for my technical prowess, that's for sure.
Mhm. Well, anytime you teach something too, you develop a deeper understanding of the sport or the art or whatever it is that you're teaching. You're learning at the same time that you're teaching. And it's funny because the students that you're working with are actually teaching you just from that experience.
Yes, you're so right. It's
Mhm.
and it's both in my ski career, it's in my mountain bike coaching
Mhm.
that I've done both here for the skiing company in the summertime and for Sacred Cycle. But it also reminds me, and I'm looking at the books in the background, and I know you and I have talked a lot about the ninja background. But I just
Mhm.
finished Shannon Lee's book about her father, Bruce Lee, called "Be Water, My
Oh.
Friend." And he talks quite a bit in that book about embracing the process as
Mhm.
opposed to the outcome. And that reminds me, that philosophy reminds me so much about what I've gone through, not only in my personal life journey, but in that ski journey. And I've really had to learn to embrace the process of becoming a better teacher and
Mhm.
becoming a better skier rather than focusing so much on each and every outcome every time I'm on the snow.
Yeah, I think sometimes we just focus on the end result and it takes away from the process of the journey of what we're doing.
Yes, for sure. And we had Tess Johnson on our podcast earlier this past fall, and she is Vail based. She was a member of the 2018 U.S. ski team
Mhm.
in moguls, and just recently won I guess the 2022 U.S. Mogul Championship. And she talked so much about how she had to herself really learn to embrace the process and not the
Mhm.
outcome, and how much her performance really started to improve in skiing once she recognized that, and how she was able to put her anxiety more at bay and really come
Mhm.
to enjoy the sport rather
Mhm.
than being focused on each and every result every time she went out on the hill.
That's such an important point that you brought up, because with the anxiety, if you're looking at the end result and the goal, there is so much pressure you're putting on yourself, and it's almost like the anxiety takes over, and
Yes,
you become, a slave to it, and that's all you
yes,
think about. And that's one of the worst things that you can do if you're trying to accomplish anything or achieve any type of challenging goal, whether it's physical or even mental or cognitive.
for sure. And I'll give an example. I don't know if I've even talked about this one on the air, but within the ski instructor realm, just like any other type of sport that you'd be participating in, different colored belts. I know for you in the martial arts. For us, there's different tiers of certification for ski instructors.
Mhm.
And when my wife and I first started teaching in Vermont, we sat and took they call the level 1 certification. And it's
Mhm.
kind of a basic, are you able to understand how people move on the snow, identify how they move, teach them some skills that will improve their skiing and their experience, and be able to demonstrate exactly what it is you want them to try. So we passed that fairly easily. We moved out here to Colorado, took a couple of other exams, and then sat for the level 2 certification, which both of us, and that we look back on it now and we probably shouldn't have done this. We took it at the exact same time. And so each one of us was worried about the other. And both of us passed that relatively seamlessly. And then I made the decision I was going to go for the level 3 certification, which is the highest level of ski instructor certification in the Professional Ski Instructor of America world. And so for me, as I mentioned earlier, the strongest part for me was always kind of the teaching and the mentoring and the identification. And so the exam is a 3-part exam, and I sat for the teaching piece and what we call the movement analysis piece, and I passed those rather easily. It was actually quite a fun exam. And then came the skiing. And so I had, for a very long time, always focused on the outcome. I had traveled to New Zealand in August of 2015 to spend a month really trying to hone my ski skills. And every chance I had when I wasn't teaching clients, I was out trying to improve my skiing, thinking about each and every turn. And I was in my own head. And I also, throughout my childhood, into my my competitive high school and college years, had tremendous performance anxiety. And so the very first time I took the level 3 ski exam, I bombed it miserably. And my immediate response, I think, for all of your audience who's listening, I'm sure they can resonate with this, was suddenly, why me? I'm terrible at the sport, right? I went down that whole rabbit hole. And so then I hired a sports psychologist because I thought, well, I'm going to take this again. And so we had worked through a whole series of issues around how I look at taking exams and coming up with mantras and things like that. But I was still so focused on the outcome that I didn't take any time at all to look at the actual process and the improvements I was making along the way. So I took the second part of that, the ski, for the second time in I guess now it was the winter of 2018 over in Breckenridge, and failed it again, almost the exact same scores.
Oh.
And at that point, I was almost ready to give up the sport.
Oh no!
Yes, the fun had come out of the sport for me, and I was looking for meaning and why I was doing it. And Mark, who is my podcast host and also an amazing instructor as well, he and I had very long conversations, and it took for me to finally not care anymore about how I skied and any of the outcomes. I would just get back on snow, and I fell in love with it again. And through my own personal mental health journey now, I've realized that, yes, it's about the process. I ski better now than I did, 2 or 3 years ago. And I have not sat for the ski portion of the exam again. I will not sit for that again. For me, it's not about getting that full certification, but it's about how much I love the sport. And it's also how much I love to help create experiences with my guests that are here. But it took me a long time to realize that.
I love the way you said it, how you fell in love with the sport again. Because that happens when you're beating yourself up and why am I doing this, and that negative self-talk because you've fallen on your face, literally and figuratively enough times, it's like, what am I doing to myself? And I hate this. And sometimes you just have to give yourself some space and grace to realize you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the love of the movement that you're doing.
You're so right. And it took me a long time. It took me work with my therapist. It took me some conversations with some friends. It took just lots of days going out and just being out on the snow and remembering why I fell in love with the sport in the first place, but also thinking back, 11, 12 years ago, my goal was never at the time to become, a level 3 certified instructor, at one of the top ski schools, mountains, in North America, if not the world.
Mhm.
And those things just sort of happened. And then I also realized that a lot of that path, even though I was part of, moving along that path, a lot of it was influences from other people. Hey, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?
Mhm.
And then I had to start to recognize, wait a minute, now I have to put up some boundaries. I'm gonna do things because I want to do them, and I'm going to do them on my terms. And so there were a lot of things that were happening during that time period that I didn't even recognize until I had time to look back and reflect.
Okay, I have kind of like a question, a two-part question. So hopefully I'll be able to get it out the way I want it to. So first of all, the first part of the question is, could you ever imagine what your life would be like without that skiing and the opportunity to start skiing? So that's one part of the question. And the second part is, I find it fascinating that your therapist is the one that suggested you try skiing. And of all things, all of the activities, he picked skiing. And I find that really interesting.
So I love the question. I'll start with part one. Yes, if I look back and I look back to my life prior to skiing, and if I were to extrapolate that out, so to give your audience a bit of an idea, during between mountain bike season and ski season, my weight will vary a little bit, and I'll bounce around between 145 to 155 ish, 160 pounds. I'm 5'9", not the tallest person in the world, but now that I'm out here in Colorado, very, very fit. And when I was living in New York, at the height of my unhealthiness, I was tipping the scale at just over 200 pounds. Food was, I see that look. Yes. I'll send you a picture. Food was just something that I found comfort in. I wasn't working out. I wasn't taking care of myself. I was besides my anxiety and OCD and other mental health issues, I was working in the finance world. I had spent from 1993 until 2004 on Wall Street. And so there was just a tremendous amount of stress. And so I was just physically in a very, very, very bad situation. And if I extrapolate that to, I'm 50 years old now. If I had to spend another 11 years in that, I don't really want to think about what that potential outcome would have been.
Mm.
But I know wouldn't have been good. So the second part of your question is really fun. And so my therapist in New York he was an amazing man, and he was in his late 70s when I first went to see him, and he had gone to do his graduate work in Switzerland, and he was an avid skier.
Okay.
And so I remember being in his office one day, and we were just talking. We started to develop this really close relationship where he would let me into some things in his personal life. And one of the things that he would share with me a lot was his love for skiing. And I remember, I'll never forget the day. And he said to me, you know what I think could be helpful for you? You should try skiing. And so my immediate response was, well, I hate skiing. And he looks at me and he said, with that, I can still see that smile. And he said, well, how do you know you hate skiing? And I said, well, my parents hate skiing. And he said, you're not your parents. And I said, yeah, but the cold, they don't like the cold. And so I came up with this litany of excuses. And so a little bit of time went by, and he nudged the topic again, and he started talking about some of his experiences in Switzerland and then ski trips he would take here in the US. And I think as he started to back off, kind of pressing the idea of skiing, I started to let it ruminate a little bit. And that's when I decided I called my mother-in-law from the office. one day, and I said, I have this idea for Amy's 33rd birthday, and I'm going to take her skiing. And there was silence on the other end of the line because Amy hadn't skied in 14 years
Mhm.
since we had met in college. My mother-in-law traveled out here quite a bit, and she had wanted to buy a house, but was afraid because she kept saying, well, I'm not going to buy a house in Colorado if Eric's not going to come out and visit. And so suddenly, everybody's world kind of reopened to skiing again once I did that. But yes, it was absolutely those conversations with my therapist, and I look back on them now, and I think that's an interesting one for me to ponder: is what would my life have been like
Yeah.
had I not had Dr. K, as I affectionately call him, as my therapist, because he really was the one who was the catalyst to help me kind of change my outlook on a sport that I never knew was going to lead me down the path that it's led me down today.
Well, I think that number one, I mean, that's a great story, but people show up in our lives at exactly the time that they're supposed to. And you've heard the saying, I'm sure, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, and they come in all sorts of different forms. So I
Yes,
love that story.
thank you. Yeah, and it actually uh, that that quote about the teacher was a kind of a bold subtitle in Shannon Lee's book. And
Mm,
so, as we both know, there were no coincidences in life, and
mhm.
skiing for me was meant to be. And I look back as well and think, if I had started skiing as a child, when I think of all the sports that I did as a child that I don't do today, I don't think it's something that I'd be so passionate about and be so madly in love with today. So I am glad that I discovered it at the time that I did.
I could relate to that because I didn't start ballet until I was like 19 or 20, which is pretty old for somebody to start dancing. But since then, of course, I've met a lot of other people who started as dancers. But I think that if I had done it all my life, growing up, by the time you get to be a certain age, 20 or 21, you're pretty much over it.
Yeah, and I'd ask you, Cheryl, because I'm curious. Do you think that you have fallen in love with ballet more because it was your choice, as opposed to something that, like you were saying, when you were a kid, if it was again more about the outcome and the performance, and
Mhm.
uh, so I'm just wondering if
For me, I looked at it as a gift to be able to study ballet as an adult. And, when I was a little girl, when I was 4 years old, I did the obligatory, ballet and tap, 1 year of that, and did a little, recital. And then my two older sisters didn't want to do it anymore. And so I just followed their lead and did everything that they did. So it wasn't until college, it was one of my cousins. We were at the same university or the same state college, and she started taking an adult ballet class and kept trying to get me to go with her. And I was like, that sounds really stupid. That sounds like the most unpleasant thing in the world is to do ballet as a grown up. It just sounded horrible. So I kept saying no until one day she showed up in my dorm room with an extra pair of leotards and ballet slippers and said, you're coming with me. And it was like, okay. So I did and just got hooked. I fell in love with it, but it always felt like, and I taught a lot of ballet through the years, to adult students as well as kids. And it was really fun to teach the adults because they came to it with the same sense of, this is such a gift that I can do this as an adult. I've wanted to do it all my life, never had the chance. And, their enthusiasm and their excitement in just walking into a ballet class it was palpable, and it was very contagious. Of course, until you get to a certain level where it's like, oh, this hurts. But at that time you're hooked.
that's right. Yes, same. I'm guessing the same kind of foot issues that in ballet as we have in ski boots. But I love how you talk about being able to see it, as a teacher, through that lens of seeing the
Mhm.
students' excitement, and that to
Mhm.
me is when activities like this really transcend the sport itself. And then
Mhm.
for me, skiing has become such a part of that for me.
Mhm.
It's really no longer about my own personal performance on the snow, but it's
Mhm.
that look that I get when I'm with somebody
Mhm.
when they're skiing their first Colorado powder day, or
Mhm.
when they go out and ski and they actually see what, it's like to be out on a bluebird day in the middle of the winter on really soft snow, and to see that smile. And then for me to think back, and I think a lot of that has to do with me learning as an adult.
Mhm.
It's still so relatively new for me,
Mhm.
that I can think back to my first day on the snow, and it brings a smile to my face as well.
Mhm.
It is, like you said, it's a magical experience that we get to do, and with people around us who we care about and want to be with.
Mhm. And the other thing I just want to point out, because you were 33 when you started
Mhm.
skiing,
Yes.
and that's not an easy thing to do as an adult, is to learn how to ski. It's completely, for I learned when I was 9, and it was still very challenging. So as an adult, I couldn't even begin to imagine. I started dancing at the age of 20, started martial arts at 47, and I think that that just highlights the fact that we're never too old to start something new or to try something new. And I think people will put that limit on themselves, like, oh, I can't start skiing because I'm too old, or I can't try this new activity because I'm too old. So could you say something about that? I mean,
Sure. And I'll give you a couple of recent examples. A lot of the people that I ski with now have been clients of mine for 8, 9, 10 years since, when I moved out here. And so many of them are, let's call them really high, you know, intermediate to expert skiers. And so that's where I spend a majority of my time. But for me, some of the most exciting moments are when I'm with brand new beginner skiers.
mhm,
And in the past month, I've had a couple of opportunities to be with skiers who I've never met before, who happen to be adults.
mhm,
And in the adult realm, I'll use anywhere from, late 20s and above. And so one of the things I do is when we get out on the snow, I can already sense what's going through their head. I can see the tension in their body, but I'll usually spend an hour or so, just kind of skiing around and getting them feeling the basic fundamentals and sliding around on the snow. And then as kind of our rapport builds and the trust builds and we're on a chairlift, I'll kind of pick an opportune moment in a conversation to just drop in by the way, I've only been doing this for 17 years. And sometimes people think when I say that I've been teaching for 17 years. And then I'll follow that up with no, 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 no. I've actually only been skiing for 17 years. And suddenly the look on their face changes, the
mhm,
tension goes away.
mhm,
I get that, are you serious look? And my response is always, yeah, I started at 33, and I fell in love with it. And I tell the story of how on my first day of skiing, I had taken a group lesson in the morning. In the afternoon, I went out skiing with my wife. I loved speed. Yeah, I was a track and field athlete. And so the speed never bothered me. I had yet to master how to stop and turn. That would have been probably beneficial before I really set my sights on going out on the mountain. But I tell them how I hit a condo on my first day. And so that they're all doing better than I was. And then the question always comes up, well, what happened when you hit the condo? And I say, well, my wife was skiing behind me and I can still remember her screaming, turn, turn, and me thinking I'd turn if I knew how. And so I kept picking up speed. And when I got to the bottom, I hit a condo with a big snowbank in front of it. And as she got to me, she just remembers me, popping up out of the snow, looking at her and saying, let's go do that again. That was so fun. And so as I tell that story to people that I'm with, they all look at me and they think, wow, so there is hope for me. I can do this. But I always make sure to do it at a time after they've kind of gone through it a little bit. I never want to drop that right at the beginning, because I feel like sometimes it can put pressure on people to feel like,
yeah.
wow, well, if he did it, then I really have to learn quickly. But yeah, no, I love sharing that little anecdote with people.
Well, and I think it's a really good decision not to share that little story about hitting a condo.
Well, I do share that. So I tell that one. It comes up usually around lunchtime because, one of the things about learning to ski, right? We all have, skiing is all about, I'm just going to say, in its most simplistic form, it's all about balance and motion, right? We're constantly balancing as we're sliding around on the snow. And so each person has different ability levels in how they balance, and so that's really the key. And so when I'm with lots of people and we're learning, there are some people who pick it up right away. Maybe they come from a figure skating background, or they've played hockey, and so they understand this idea of independent feet and balance and pushing off, or people who are dancers. My wife is a dancer. She took to skiing very quickly. There are others who don't really come from an athletic background, and so that whole concept of balancing while moving on a frictionless surface can be a little bit terrifying. And so yeah, people fall, people get up. And so that usually comes up if I'm with people who are falling and getting frustrated, and it's usually my way of giving them a bit of a pick me up when I tell them, like, look, you guys have fallen, you're fine, you keep getting up. I hit a condo on my first day, and that's exactly how I dropped that one. And I said, I hit a condo on my first day, and look at me now. So I said, you're already light years ahead of my first day of skiing, so the sky's the limit.
That is hilarious. And I have this mental image of you popping out of this snowdrift, almost like a cartoon character. I think that's absolutely hysterical.
Yes, yes. And I remember it was, I can only imagine now being back on that hill and probably thinking to myself, gosh, this is as flat as the floor of my house. But I just remember as I was skiing down towards the bottom of the run, there was a lift line and the maze where the rope is. And I just remember seeing everybody sort of part like the Red Sea as I slid under the rope for the lift line and just straight to the snowbank and the condo.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great story.
yeah, no, it's a story that people should take and realize, there are no obstacles too large that should stop us from doing things in life that we really want to do and that we love.
Beautifully said. I love that. Now, tell us about your mountain bike experience, or how you got into that. Was it as colorful as your skiing ventures?
So mountain biking was not as colorful. So I had run track and field when I was in high school, and then my first couple of years in college, and I stopped, and I would run on and off when I was living in New York and in my early years. But when we were about to move out here to Colorado, I realized that my health really, both my mental health, but my physical health also needed to change. And so I bought a bike, and I was biking quite a bit in that summer. And before we moved to Colorado, outside of New York City, and I really fell in love with the bike. It could take me places much further and faster than if I was walking or running. And so I really got into road biking. And when we moved out here, I ended up joining a team called Rocky Mountain Health Plans. It was a master's team that was based down in Parker, and the team manager is an extremely close friend of mine to this day. But that kind of started my love affair with biking and bike racing. And then as I got a little bit more uncomfortable on the road over the years, is with cars and texting and things like that, I happened to be on a ride with Tim Johnson, who was the U.S. national cyclocross champion a couple of times. And he and I were riding, and we were on our road bikes, and he suddenly said, "Oh, let's go over here." And we veered off onto, like some sort of a gravel path. And I thought, wow, how cool is this? I'm riding my road bike and I'm not on the road. And so I started racing cyclocross, which for people who are unfamiliar with cyclocross, it's essentially a road bike with slightly wider tires, where you're racing in all sorts of weather conditions. It takes place in the fall and the winter. Lots of races up at Valmont in Boulder. But riding on the grass, riding in the mud, riding in the snow, on and off the bike. Just a very high anaerobic sport, but lots of fun. And so I did that for almost 3 seasons. And my coach at the time had mentioned to me, well, why don't you try mountain biking? It'll help your bike handling skills. And so with everything else, I was resistant at first.
Of course. I
and
understand.
then, yes, and then got on a mountain bike, and the rest is history. I've been mountain biking now probably since 2016. Kind of self-taught, a little bit self-coached. Just like skiing, I fell in love with it, and I fell in love not only with being on the bike and being out, riding in the same places that I get to ski in the wintertime, but I really fell in love with that whole coaching and mentoring piece. And so as my mountain bike, skills improved, it really was very circuitous with, my coaching, and then brought me into, the sacred cycle world. And it allowed me to be outdoors in nature, doing two really, really, really fun sports at a high level, 365 days a year.
Awesome. Well, you're not only just enjoying that sport, you're really helping women as you're doing it.
Yes.
And so how did that happen?
So Sacred Cycle was founded in 2013 by a friend of mine, Heather Russell, who lives here in Carbondale, Colorado, which is about 30 minutes to the north of where I am. And I remember I was still, fairly new to the whole coaching scene, and they were hosting a women's skills clinic here in the Roaring Fork Valley. And they were looking for coaches, and they had asked if I wanted to participate, and I said sure, I would love to. And so I coached that one skills clinic, and from there I ended up working later on in that summer with a couple of the program participants. The following year, they asked me if I wanted to come on full time to be a mountain bike coach. And that was in the summer of 2020. So it was that weird COVID affected year.
Right.
And I jumped on the opportunity, worked with two unbelievable women that summer who I've gone on to become very close friends with, and had the honor of attending one of their weddings this past fall. So that was great. And then in the winter 2020 going into 2021, they were creating a new position, which was kind of the lead mountain bike coach, which so I'd be, overseeing and hiring the coaches and leading the skills clinics and doing everything on the mountain bike programming side. And they asked me if I wanted to take on that role. And I said, I'd love to, but with the caveat, I still wanted to coach. And so, so this past season, I was leading the mountain bike program for them. I was coaching, and they're coaching two amazing women. And with one of the participants from the prior year, she and I entered a race here in Snowmass, and with my participant from the current year, she and I entered a race in Eagle. She had never been in a mountain bike race before, and so for me, it's been just so amazing to see how empowered these women get from the time that I meet them in May when they're just coming into the program, and watching their friendships build, watching their confidence on the bike build, and as they reintegrate into the community, just watching themselves become even stronger and more powerful versions of their old self. And the ultimate honor came for me this past October when they asked me if I would take a seat on the board of the organization. And so now I actually get to play a role in helping shape the vision and the strategy of Sacred Cycle going forward.
It just sounds like such an empowering experience.
It is. It certainly is, and I can say for all of the women who I've met within Sacred Cycle and who I've coached, we've all become very, very close friends. We text back and forth,
Mhm.
and I feel like I've learned as much from them as they have from me. And even in my own recent journey, my mental health, when I took a bit of a setback at the end of 2021, they were all there for me.
Oh,
And for me, it came full circle. And it was amazing to think about how I had spent an entire summer kind of talking about and talking through trauma and watching them move through their own journeys, and then here they were for me when I was going through one of my darkest times, and so the bond just became even stronger, and I can't imagine what my life would be like without Sacred Cycle in it.
that's beautiful. And I love that bond that you have with the women. And I also like what you were saying, because this, again, the mental health journey, a lot of times isn't a smooth trajectory, upwards either. You always can have those dark times. And that's, I think, just part of the nature of having mental health issues. And
Yes, you're so right. It's we talk about it on our podcast all the time. It is a journey with no end, but it is a
mhm,
non-linear journey. And
mhm.
so it's very much like Lord of the Rings, except you never find the ring.
Mhm. Well, and this was a perfect segue, because that's where I was heading, was into the podcast, wanting you to talk about the podcast, when you started it, how you started it. I know you've got a partner, and just tell us about the podcast.
Sure. So the podcast is called From Survivor to Thriver. And the idea came to me in November of 2020. So my co-host, Mark Fernandez, who I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
is one of my closest friends here. He lives across the street,
Mhm.
and on the show, when he opens it up every week, when he throws it over to me, he says, and from across the creek. And so literally we do live right across the street. There is a creek called Brush Creek that flows between our houses. And so I had just gotten back from vacation with my wife in late November of 2020. And I remember landing back here in Colorado and looking up at the mountains and seeing the snow, and realizing that the ski season was not going to be anything like the ski seasons of past. And it also hit me that I had never really mourned the abrupt end to
Mhm.
the ski season. For us, it was March 14th, 2020 at 6 p.m. I'll never forget
Mm.
that day. And so there was just a flood of emotions that kind of raced through me at the time. And so I was having a bit of trouble sleeping for a couple of nights, and I found myself up one night kind of writing furiously on the couch, and a bunch of thoughts came pouring out around ski season and my own mental health journey, and where I had been and where I am now. And I had wanted to get that published as a blog piece, but I wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it. And I remember I was in Mark's house in late December of 2020. I was talking about what I had written, and he and I were having a conversation. And suddenly I remember looking up at him and saying, "We need to start a podcast." And oddly enough, neither Mark probably more than me. I had never listened to podcasts before. I know Mark had listened to a few, but we had no idea what we were in store for. Didn't even know the first thing about what it was to have a podcast, and all the work that was going to be going into it. But I realized during the course of writing that blog piece that we really needed to start to speak openly and honestly about mental health. That those conversations, as we call them, needed to become kitchen table conversations. And so we both looked at each other and we said, all right, we're all in, we're going to do this. And so we launched the podcast at the end of January of 2021. And the first episode was just very simply Mark and myself. And I was sharing my story and my journey. And I remember after we recorded it, I thought, well, if just one person listens to this podcast, just one, and it changes, a decision that they may have been, unfortunately wanting to make, or changed the trajectory of their own mental health journey, job done. And so we went on to record, 2 or 3 more episodes. And I remember I was out, we were skiing, and I was on the chairlift, and a couple of people who I know were there with me, one who I didn't know. And one of my friends started asking me about the podcast. And I said, yep, we launched it, and, it's been really fun, and we're looking forward to finding more guests. And I remember he turned to me and he's like, oh, I listened to your episode and it was, and so inspirational. And he said, I bet you didn't know I have bipolar. And it was at that moment that I realized, I think we're onto something, right? That was exactly the kind of conversation that I wanted to hear happen, right? To be on a chair and somebody was like, oh, I went out to so-and-so for dinner last night, and somebody else looking and being like, yeah, I was going to go too, but my OCD kind of took over it. And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't just something that Mark and I did, that he and I listened to, but suddenly other people were listening to the podcast. And so here we are, it's April of 2022, and we released episode 54 this past Tuesday. Last night, I think I was mentioning to you, Cheryl, before we went live, we recorded episode 60. And I look back on it now, and in my wildest dreams, I couldn't imagine where this was going to take us. The amazing people, including yourself, who I've had the opportunity to meet and create relationships with, and it's also given me a medium to really share, my own nonlinear journey in real time, and by hearing the stories of our guests. A lot of them have actually, inspired me to try different things and to go down different pathways and to grow and to become a better version of myself as well.
That's one of the wonderful hidden gems and benefits of doing a podcast, because it really, as we were talking earlier, it really is a lot of work. But I think the people that I have met in doing my show, and the things I have learned from them, I could not have gotten this type of information any other way. And it is building friendships and more community. And even, I've listened to some of your shows, and one thing I love about it, it's uplifting, because mental health can be a little bit of a downer, but to be able to give people hope that, number one, they're not alone in this journey. Number two, there are people that you can talk to who are not just the professionals, but actual people real people who've gone through it. It's just so supportive. And I think it's just a really valuable, a valuable thing that you're offering.
Thank you. And, I love how you kind of describe it, because it's one of our big messages is, in fact, you're not alone. And we now look at it as what we're trying to do is really upend the front end of the mental health space. And by that, I mean, the back end is where all the amazing resources reside, whether it's traditional Western talk therapy or, medication, or on the Eastern side, right? Reiki. I'm just thinking some of the things I do, meditation. There's so many amazing tools out there, but the conversation itself needs to happen in order for it to be built so that people actually know about those resources and feel comfortable finding those resources. And so I feel as though that's where Mark and I have kind of found our unique niche, is in really helping to jumpstart these conversations so that people feel comfortable, as you said, knowing they're not alone, knowing that there are other people who have gone through something similar. Um, I feel like by me sharing, my recent struggles real time, it also
Mhm.
shows that we can have where things are going really well. And it's
Mhm.
perfectly okay to have periods where things aren't going as well. But just as important is this whole idea of, when things aren't going well, being willing to raise your hand, to ask for help, to be
Mhm.
vulnerable,
Mhm.
and know that there's a community of like-minded people out there who are happy and willing to listen, to not pass judgment,
Mhm.
and to want to help you along in your journey.
Okay, the vulnerability part. You just did a post, I think, on LinkedIn about vulnerability.
Yes.
See, I
Yes.
stalk you on social media.
I'm actually happy to hear that, because I'm being 50. I'm sort of in that generation where, I just started to straddle, social media. And so going to college, I had a word processor. I think that's when, the Apple II and the Mac, first came out. Amy and I were watching something last night, which was fascinating, all about the reemergence of the cassette tape. And so cassette tapes and mixtapes, right? So I remember CDs as I was graduating were just starting to come out, right? So, but it makes me happy because I'm handling kind of all the social media stuff
Mhm.
on the From Survivor to Thriver side, and trying to use LinkedIn and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and
Oh,
try to marry all these things together.
uh-huh.
And so, yeah, so the fact that you saw that message that got out there, I feel like job done.
There, you're doing a great job. And if you think it's challenging for you just turning 50, you can imagine how it is for a baby boomer.
Yes.
I mean, I miss the rotary phone.
Oh gosh, the rotary phone.
Yeah.
Love it. I love
Mhm.
it. You'd have to walk around the house, right, with the cord, and you could only go like, if you wanted privacy to have a conversation, you could only like go so far, and you had to sort of
Yeah,
whisper. And
there was no such thing as privacy.
no.
And especially I grew up in a house with, I have 4 sisters.
Oh gosh. So
Yeah. So,
everybody wanted the one phone at the same time.
and everybody wanted to listen in on your conversation.
Yep. And there was no call waiting. So
Oh
there's a
God,
whole
no.
generation of people who have no idea what it would be like to call somebody and for hours on end get the busy signal.
Right. I mean, what would you do? I mean, life would
Yes.
be over. And what
Yes.
was the party line? My husband is 6 years older than me, and he grew up in rural Georgia, and he actually remembers party lines. Do you know what those
Yes.
are?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. Yep. So yeah, there's a whole uh, when I think about where we've moved in technology today,
Mhm.
but I think life would be in many ways a little more simplistic and a little more enjoyable if we
Yeah.
brought some of those things back into our day to day.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be nice. Just have some of that simplicity. You can go to the high tech stuff whenever you're ready. And then when you need a break and just need to get back to the basics and the simple things in life, yeah, you have that option.
Yes.
So let's
Yes.
start a campaign, bring back the rotary phone.
And bring back mixtapes. Love mixtapes.
I was just thinking, I actually have some tapes and I was wondering, what do I do with them? Do I throw them out? And they're original recordings from a gentleman by the name of Moshe Feldenkrais, who, I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner. And I bought them when I was, oh my gosh, I was in graduate school. So it was a really long time ago. And they're grainy, they're hard to hear. But of course, now I can't play them.
Yep.
So I would love to have that option of being able to play them. So I'm going to keep my eyes open for those
Oh, for
cassette
sure.
recordings.
They definitely are like cassette players out there. There seems to be a whole kind of underground movement of people who are collectors. And Amy and I were watching this, and we could see where our cassette tapes were pretty close
Uh-huh.
to where the TV was. And I was then starting to think back into my college days. And I remember making her a whole series of mixtapes and being up late at night, right? And you'd have to run from it'd have to be a double cassette type deck, so you could run a song on one and then record onto the other tape, and picking the right song to go with, right, with, and speaking into it. And it was just such a fun magical thing that you could do. And yeah, I don't feel like, downloading a playlist now off of Spotify or off of Apple doesn't have that same raw emotional feeling as handing somebody a tape that you had made and written on, and they could take with you.
Yeah, I agree. But doing the download when you need a playlist in a hurry from Apple's is pretty cool.
Yes, it
Yeah.
is.
Although it took me a lot, I didn't get I didn't get Apple Music, and I think it was this past April. Oh
Oh,
my
wow.
gosh. So yeah, it was last April. So
It was
it's
last
been a
April.
year. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm still struggling with it. Anyway. So Erik, this has been so much fun talking to you, and I could talk to you all day, but you have a busy day ahead of you.
I do.
Mhm.
Do you want me to actually say what I'm going to do?
Oh,
I
go
don't
ahead,
want
because I'm
to.
suffering when you told me what you were going to do. So I mean, I miss skiing so much. But yeah, it just,
Yeah,
so
no,
go ahead.
one of the fun things about this time of year is, the mountains are still open for us until I think the 25th of April this year. We have
Mhm.
a really solid snowpack here in the Colorado Rockies. And so it's really that transitional time where, our guests and visitor traffic almost grinds to a halt. And so we're not, other than a couple of days here and there, we're not really teaching,
Mhm.
with the same, sort of day-to-dayness as we would in the winter. And so now it's just fun to get out and, go for a ski for a couple hours during the day when the snow softens up a little bit and the sun is out. I think, as I mentioned before we came on, it is a perfect Colorado bluebird day here. It's about 30 degrees, so the snow is still very wintry. So yes, I am going to, when we wrap up, I'm going to go ski for a couple of hours and then, go see my therapist. And as you had mentioned, you said sometimes your therapy sessions were even improved after you had the chance to be, in the dojo, getting some of that aggression out. And I feel for me, I can think a lot more clearly after I've had a couple of hours on the snow, just being out in nature, and things sort of pop into
Mhm.
my head.
Yeah.
And then I can go right into my therapy session and have a much more meaningful conversation.
Yeah, I always feel better. Apparently I have anger issues. So
You and I wouldn't be doing podcasts. We wouldn't be talking about mental health if we didn't have anger issues.
an excellent point. So now, Erik, how can people find you? Or
Sure.
where can they
So
find you? Obviously, social media.
yeah, so we're everywhere. So From Survivor to Thriver is the name of the podcast, and new episodes come out each Tuesday on Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts from. As I mentioned, we are on Facebook.
Mhm.
So we have a Facebook page called From Survivor to Thriver. We're on TikTok, which I am told is, the medium now. It's at From Survivor to Thriver. We have an Instagram page, at Brush Creek Thrivers.
Mhm.
And if you want to follow my own personal exploits, my personal Instagram handle is at Ski Sherpa. So you'll find everything on there from, skiing to mountain biking, to the latest, in terms of what's going on with our show.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thanks for that information. So I can go there and start stalking you there as well.
Yes, and I'll be sure to get you all of the info, when we get off the show.
Okay, excellent. Yes, and all your links, everything will be included in the show notes
Oh,
and
thank you
the
so much.
description. So it'll always be there. So Erik, it has been such an honor and a pleasure. And before we sign off, do you have any final little pearls of wisdom you can leave with the audience?
I would I would just say, if you feel like something isn't right, speak,
Mhm.
reach out for help. We brought up the vulnerability word. We didn't really talk about it, but it's vulnerability. I look at it's a strength. It's okay to be vulnerable. So don't feel like you're the only one out there, because you're not. Somebody else has gone through something similar, and so you can also feel free. You can message me directly. You can message us through the podcast. We're always here to listen. We're always here to help. But there is a better way. And, as Cheryl had said a bit earlier, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So that's kind of what I'd like to leave your audience with. And I just wanted to say, thank you, Cheryl, so much for having me on. It's an absolute honor. It's been great getting to talk with you and your audience, for the past hour, and having you in Denver so close. I know there's going to be lots of opportunities for us to get together, and you're going to be on our show in just a couple of short weeks. So we're really looking forward to that as well.
Okay. And I'm looking forward to it too. And I can't wait to meet Mark as well. And don't be surprised if I go driving up the hill, knocking at your door someday going, hey, Erik, show me a few things.
You're always welcome to come up and ski.
Oh God, it's been so long. It's been so long, but I really do miss it. It's just.
But I hit a condo on the first day, so it doesn't matter how long. See how I worked that in there?
That was really good. Love that. I can guarantee I will not hit a condo. I am the kind of skier always in control. Not only do I have anger issues, but I'm also a control freak. So always in control.
We could have a whole other podcast about how skiing is all about enjoying that sense of not being in control.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. That would be a very interesting conversation. One that I had with my youngest sister was on the Penn State ski team. And so when she would ski with me, and my dad and my sister and my husband would just stand at the bottom of the mountain and watch me go down, and they'd say 1, 2, 3 turn, 1, 2, 3 turn, and it made my sister crazy. She says, don't you ever want to lose control? And I'm like, have you met me?
That's the fall line is where all the fun is, right? It's that everything as the skis are pointing down the hill, right? That's that moment where I feel like I'm living.
Well, I'm always in control. Maybe you can encourage me to loosen up a little bit. We shall see.
Well, thank you again. It was a really fun morning.
Thank you, Erik. Have a wonderful day. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. And check out the podcast, Erik's podcast. Check out his social media. The guy obviously is amazing. If you're ever up in Snowmass, make sure you schedule a ski lesson with him, because I'm pretty sure he's really a fabulous teacher. And I'm also pretty sure he will not let you ski into a condo. And that is the way of the FemiNinja. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.